Daniel Greenfield's Friday Afternoon Roundup, Friday, May 4th, 2012. Victories and defeats. The whole gutsy call narrative depends on the calculus of risk. In going after bin Laden, the SEALs were risking their lives. But what was Obama risking? An ordinary leader would at least be expected to suffer political fallout from a failure, but does anyone really believe that a media which failed to hold Obama accountable for his defeats in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Islamic disaster in Egypt and Libya, not to mention an economic crater, would have held him accountable if the operation had failed? Even in the worst-case scenario, had the SEALs been captured and paraded on Pakistani television, the blame for the operation would have gone to some military figures, while Obama would have given another speech, conducted more backdoor appeasement, and been praised for his leadership in a difficult time. This operation, like everything Obama has done, contains strictly no risk. There are no gutsy calls when you never take responsibility for anything, when the buck never stops with you. To be gutsy, you have to be playing without a net, and the media is Obama's net. Had the operation gone wrong, we would never have seen that Situation Room photo. Obama would have pretended to have had little knowledge of the operation until it was too late to prevent it from going forward. The whole thing might have even been blamed on some eager beavers who went rogue in their eagerness to get bin Laden. In time, the story might have unraveled, and there would have been tips and conspiracy theories, but you would likely never have heard about it from the media. The media bubble creates Obama's reality. The same operation under Bush would have been tagged with names like unilateral and dangerously irresponsible, with a strong suggestion that the president had taken us to the brink of nuclear war because of his bloodlust and to improve his political standing. Under Obama, it's proof that he's a superhuman strongman who single-handedly took down bin Laden, doing what no one else would have done in his place. It's easy enough to compare the motives. It's easy enough to compare the narratives. Remember how much media furor there was about a proposed invasion of Iraq? How much skepticism, criticism, and sheer coverage the whole thing got. Now compare that to our proposed invasion of Syria. Oh right, we're on track for that, but don't expect the media to tell you about it, or to challenge the Friends of Syria name for the coalition, far more risible than Coalition of the Willing, which despite its ridicule and awkwardness was at least true. For bonus points, imagine if Bush had dubbed it Friends of Iraq. That blast in Kabul was not the first or the last. We're losing the war. We're trying to cut a deal with anyone in the Taliban willing to deal with us, and most of them aren't. But you wouldn't know all that from the splashy media coverage of the Mission Accomplished tour. Targeting individual terrorist leaders is the only thing that this administration has successfully done. But as victories go, it's akin to assassinating Hitler and Rommel while losing Africa and Europe. It's a victory of sorts, but only if you overlook the sheer scope of defeats that occurred as a direct result of administration policy. We got bin Laden and lost Egypt, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Tunisia, and probably Yemen. A few more victories like these, and we won't be facing one man's terrorist army, but an entity on the scale of the Soviet Union with the oil resources of OPEC. They call it the Caliphate. Obama calls it Mission Accomplished. Blind men from China. Sorry, Mr. Chen, you mistook this for the America you heard about, but you ended up in an outpost of our government which is run by an Indonesian con artist and his cronies. It's a natural mistake. We made it too, and we're not even blind men from China. What is bitterly amusing is that, in the run-up to all this, the Obamanoid media was touting his brave new foreign policy aimed at China. Even the generally reliable Walter Russell Mead suggested that Obama's Asia policy was a major game-changer and that we had actually pushed China into a corner. The Chen case reminds us of what a load of nonsense all that is. We haven't done anything to China. Obama may flap his lips, but China has him whipped, just as Russia and the Muslim world do. Stationing a few thousand Marines in Australia isn't a game change. It's nothing. It might allow us to intervene in Indonesia's next killing spree if we were likely to do that sort of thing to one of our wonderfully genocidal Islamic allies and its elegant dog cuisines. It isn't a game changer in the South China Sea because everyone knows we don't have the guts for it. The Philippines may run to us just like Mr. Chen did, but we won't protect them just like we didn't protect him. A demon virgin named Jihad. Behind every dedicated Muslim jihadist on trial for plotting to blow stuff up is a liberal lawyer working hard to get him off. These are the unsung heroes of the jihad, brave, brief-cased infidels trotting up the courthouse steps and then down again to explain that their client can't get a fair trial because the country is biased against Muslim terrorists. This time around, Robert Gottlieb did his best to convince the jury that would-be subway bomber Adis Medunjanin went to Afghanistan to join the Taliban and stand up for Muslims. They wanted to fulfill some romantic version of jihad, he said. That was his defense. Just foolish boys in love with a beautiful demon virgin named Jihad. Prior to this, Gottlieb's prominent clients were Cindy Sheehan and Peter Braunstein, the former Village Voice writer who dressed up as a fireman and broke into an apartment to rape a woman with whom he worked. The Sheehan rap was apparently pro bono. Around that time, the New York Times, which came out of the closet as a propaganda rag, described the case as a clash between high principles represented by the Zola-like lead defense lawyer Robert C. Gottlieb and the black letter of the law represented by William Bish. Sadly, this time Sheehan and Braunstein's Zola lost. Adis, romantic jihadist and would-be subway bomber, will join Peter Braunstein in the clink, and Robert Gottlieb will go back to work doing what he does best. Europe, here we come. American Muslims grew in number over the past decade, outnumbering Jews for the first time in most of the Midwest and part of the South, while most mainline churches lost adherents, according to a census of American religions released on Tuesday. Some 158 million Americans were classified as unclaimed by any religion in the survey. Among major religions, the census found the number of Catholics, the largest single faith, declined 5% to 58.9 million during the decade. Catholics had the largest numeric decline, including big losses in Maine, where a priest abuse scandal came to light, Jones said. In the New England region, Catholic funerals are outnumbering baptisms, he added. Among the other large U.S. faiths, adherence to the Southern Baptist Convention held steady at 19.9 million over the decade. The United Methodist Church lost 4% to 9.9 million adherents. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America lost 18% to 4.2 million, and the Episcopal Church lost 15% of its adherents to 1.95 million. But of course, it can happen here. But then, that's what Europe said. Immigration something, reform. Ann Coulter always seemed like she's the only one in on her own joke. Her latest column has the usual snarky headline, "Deport the GOP establishment," as if she wasn't part and parcel of it, as if she hadn't spent the last months determinedly shoving the establishment's choice down our throats. But okay, this time she's back on conservative terra firma. Reform immigration. Sounds good, right? Oh no. On no issue is the elite American divide so great as on immigration. For decades, the majority of Americans have wanted to decrease immigration. Not just illegal immigration, all immigration. Ellipsis. Our official policy is to turn away scientists in order to make room for illiterate Pakistani peasants who will drop out of high school to man coffee carts until deciding to plot a terrorist attack against the United States. There's one paragraph of separation here. Just one, and those were two quotes. But apparently Coulter is under the impression that Americans don't want to lose coffee cart jobs, but they're okay with losing college degree jobs. But she's not really under that impression. It's more phony Chamber of Commerce populism. Coulter isn't one of those bad GOP elites. She wants what the common man wants. More immigrants with college degrees. But Adis Medunjanin had a college degree in economics. Muslim terrorists plotting attacks are more likely to have college degrees than to be illiterate Pakistani peasants. Illiterate peasants rarely have the cash and wherewithal to make it to this country. In a novel thought, Romney proposes that we grant citizenship to people who would make America this is a quote again. In a novel thought, Romney proposes that we grant citizenship to people who would make America a better place, repeatedly saying that he would like to staple a green card to the diplomas of foreigners who receive PhDs in math or the hard sciences. He may be the first national politician in 2 generations who thinks we should use legal immigration to get our average up. End quote. That's not a novel thought, it's an old punchline. Let's start that stapling. Muhammad Atta had a degree in architecture and was working on a master's degree in urban planning. He was part of the, quote, engineering syndicate, end quote, of the Muslim Brotherhood. Marwan al-Shehi was working on a degree in shipbuilding. Ziad Jarrah was studying aerospace engineering in Hamburg. If we staple enough of those green cards, we'll take care of our terrorist pilot quota for a good while. Behind Coulter's snappy lines is a complete intellectual incoherence. She starts off as an immigration populist, pivots to promoting immigration by educated elites, throws in something about Muslim terrorists and the problem of third world immigration, goes back to pushing immigration by degree, which does not actually limit third world immigration, bashes the DREAM Act, when her whole premise is that we need graduates so long as we don't pay for their education. Those are all different problems looped together with punchlines and boiled into a stew. They all have to be addressed individually. Limiting immigration to people with degrees will not keep out terrorists. It may shift the balance away from the third world, but I wouldn't entirely bet on that. Romney's opposition to the DREAM Act isn't quite as ironclad as Coulter pretends, and with Rubio, we've got a Republican version in the works, which Romney hasn't come out against. Muslim voters found to be most forgetful. Quote, a senior official at Tower Hamlets has rejected allegations of postal vote fraud, claiming Muslim voters simply forgot how they signed registration forms. Asked about an increase in rejected postal votes from 10% to 14%, Ms. Freeman said this was because voters had forgotten how they signed the registered application in the first place. This is not unusual in relation to Muslim voters, end quote. Yes, I don't doubt that it's not unusual. Apparently, in the UK, they actually still verify votes. That's an outmoded racist custom that we have long since abandoned under Generalissimo Holder. The Democrats and the Jewish vote. Quote, however, on January 26, 2012, when I was on a visit to the U.S., historian Dr. Raphael Madoff published an article where he documented how the American Zionist Emergency Council sent the State Department a 13-page memo urging the United States to indict the Mufti, and how Professor Netanyahu had taken out ads in major U.S. newspapers headlined, "The Mufti must be brought to trial," while featuring a photograph of Husseini meeting with Hitler. Dr. Madoff confirmed that the Truman administration had indeed ignored the protests, and that this contributed to the Republican landslide in the 1946 midterm congressional elections, including the election of the first Republican senator from New York in 30 years, and the shocking defeat of Truman's candidate in a congressional election in New York City in early 1948. End quote. Dr. Madoff concluded that, quote, these developments doubtless had a profound impact on Truman. Fear of losing Jewish votes to the Republicans moved Truman to endorse the idea of a Jewish state in 1946 when he heard Dewey was about to do so, to support the 1947 UN partition plan when his advisors told him failure to do so would cost him 2 or 3 pivotal states in the 1948 presidential election, and surely influenced his decision in May 1948 to recognize the newborn state of Israel. End quote. Few Democrats today would be afraid of that. I'm not convinced that Truman really had much to worry about. His general unpopularity could be put down to a number of reasons other than this. Dewey never did pick up any Jewish votes, though Truman lost some. Wallace, arguably the most pro-Israel candidate in the race, picked up far more. Eisenhower, however, did pick up quite a few Jewish votes and had the largest share for a Republican until Reagan-Carter. The Democratic share of the Jewish vote has never reached the high points of FDR and LBJ again. Maybe Jews just like voting for acronyms. Appeals to ethnic solidarity don't work. Goldwater had the worst Jewish vote share of any Republican, and Dukakis' Jewish wife and promises to hold a Seder in the White House did not save him from a worse performance than Walter Mondale. Stridently anti-Israel presidents of both parties have suffered a noticeable fall-off of Jewish support. Carter went from 71% of the Jewish vote to 45%. Bush Sr. went from 35% to 11%. But it can be hard to tell to what extent Jews are following a general trend in abandoning unpopular incumbents. The source of the article that David Bedine cites above can be found in the New York Sun, from the always informative Raphael Madoff. Meanwhile, quote, meanwhile, the Republicans were talking up the Zionist cause. In 1944, the GOP had adopted the first ever platform plank endorsing Jewish statehood, which the Democrats then had to match. From 1945 to 1948, the likely contenders for the Republican nomination, Senator Robert Taft and Governor Thomas Dewey, repeatedly urged creation of a Jewish state and criticized the Truman administration for waffling on the issue. Despite the mythology built up afterward, partly by Truman, who may have come around to believing his own press, Truman was not particularly well disposed toward Israel or Jews. George Marshall of the Marshall Plan was a strong opponent of Israel, and the British government had agents of influence in Washington, under the British Security Coordination, and was pushing to have the United States jointly police the mandate. New York in 1946 did see a startling amount of Republican victories, and the first Republican senator from New York in 30 years was the Jewish Senator Jacob Javits. The end.